Thanks for joining this week's GoErie live discussion. Today, Erie Times News reporter Ed Palatella will be talking with Nick Figlione, CEO of Erie's Perseus House Charter School of Excellence. I'm Erie Times News online reporter Sarah Grabsky, and I'll be moderating your GoErie live comments today. Thanks to Gannon University for sponsoring these live discussions every week. Enjoy the conversation. Ed?
Thank you, Sarah. Well, hello, Nick. Thanks for being with us.
Ed, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you very much.
So, the Erie Times News invited Mr. Figlione to come on to discuss charter school reforms in light of Governor Wolf's call for changes to the charter school law. So Nick's going to give us a perspective of those proposals from the angle of the charter school. So, Nick, to start, if you could just explain your background and then Perseus House Charter School of Excellence, what it does, where
Sure.
it's located, your history with the school district, and then we'll go from there.
Sounds like a great place to start. So the Charter School of Excellence really started from work that was done between the Erie City School District and the larger corporation company Perseus House. So let me kind of take you back a little bit and give you that history, and then I can get into my particular background and get us caught up with some of the background. So Perseus House started working with the Erie School District in around 1996, specifically to work on and with schools delivering emotional and behavioral support systems to students who were struggling with various behaviors and or traumatic types of situations. So we started moving into the schools, partnering with the school district to offer supports to these students in the school system. Fast forward a couple of years after that began, we started to work in the area of alternative education. Alternative education at the time was a contract that we had with the City of Erie School District that was intended to provide educational services to students that were removed from their traditional homeschool classrooms for a period of about 45 school days. This model was in effect, and for about 5 years, from about 98 to 2003, it was strictly the alternative education. Well, one of the areas that became very evident with the Erie School District was that they had found a significant number of students that were enrolled in the 9th grade were not at graduation at 12th grade, and one of the areas that they've identified was the student who would be at risk for academic failure, which really prompted a conversation with our organization, Perseus House, because at the time we were delivering education as well as social emotional intervention with students, and we're having a good amount of success with those students. So the city and Perseus House together came up with the concept of the Charter School of Excellence. So we are one of the few schools in the state that is in collaboration, and that's the angle that our Charter School of Excellence became opened on. And so in 2003 we started, and we were at the old Hamilton school on 29th and Harvard, and since then we opened up 2 other sites. One is the Maritime Center, which was out on the east side of town, and another one was the Leadership Center on 15th and Peach. Since that time, we've moved our services, and we provide our education services to students in grades 6 through 12, but the services now are located. We have Leadership Center, which is a high school location serving students in grades 9 through 12. That's located at 1511 Peach Street. And then we have 2 centers located at Lovell Place on 13th and French. We have the Skills Center, which is an additional 9 through 12 high school, which is located at the Lovell Place on the French Street side, and then on the 13th Street side is Discovery Center, which is a middle school serving students grades 6 through 8.
How many students do you have overall?
Right now, we run on average about 575 students. Ed, we believe we're right sized, we're right fit. There's students that come to us that have, for whatever reason, are having needing a change of educational design, placement, location, but we feel we're right sized where we're at. We provide approximately 140 to 145 middle school seats, and then the rest would be high school seats, with about 290 at Skill Center and about 150 at Leadership Center.
And then in terms of your student makeup, according to the latest state data, about 94% of your student population is considered economically disadvantaged. Is that about right?
That'll fluctuate to some degree, but certainly not significantly, so that's an accurate statement.
And when we talk about economically disadvantaged, we're basically talking about students from high poverty neighborhoods.
That's correct.
Right. So Nick, anything else you want us to know about the Perseus House?
Just that our Charter School of Excellence has a mission. First of all, we believe that there's no throwaway students, and we also believe that we got to support students academically as well as social and emotionally. And quite honestly, Ed, that's been our mission. We've been focused at it, and despite all of the political pieces that come to the table, which prompted our conversation, that's been our focus, and we're meeting that target.
And then your charter, Nick, is it expires on June 30th of 2021?
That's correct.
So you'll start the renewal process in 2020. Probably start early.
That's
2020.
Correct.
So Nick, let's talk a little bit about what Governor Wolf has proposed. In mid-August, he came out with his package of charter school reforms, and they include basically limiting enrollment for charter schools that do not provide a high-quality education, more transparency in terms of enrollment practices, and then holding charter schools to the same transparency standards as regular public or traditional public schools. A lot of his reforms have to deal with more private charters rather than public. You're a public charter in that you get your money from the school district, but you are a public nonprofit. You're not a private corporation that's running the school.
That's correct. And so a couple things. So first off, all charter schools are public schools by law. The difference would be is what type of organization runs the charter school. You're correct. We are a nonprofit. Our focus has always been nonprofit status. Perseus House, the parent company, is nonprofit, and the charter school is nonprofit as well. And I really want to also point out that there's a distinction. The Charter School of Excellence has its own board, our own budget. We are a separate entity from Perseus House Incorporated.
And so the governor is also talking about the funding practices in terms of charter schools being held accountable for how they spend their money, prevent charters from overcharging districts and taxpayers for the services that the charter schools provide, the fee-for-service model where it's already been implemented, where the state will be charging charter schools if they need to resolve funding disputes with their school districts, which does not seem to be the case with you.
No, it has not been the case. There's a few districts that we've had to pursue that with, but quite honestly, Erie's been pretty solid. Erie City specifically has been very solid with our relationship and paying, and so that's not been an issue for us.
And that's where you get the majority of your students, correct?
That's correct. About 85 to 90% of our students come from directly within the city limits.
And then the governor is also talking about some cyber charters as well, which really doesn't apply that's a whole different topic, because those are not regulated by the local school district. The state regulates those, so that's a whole different area.
It is. And that's part of the, in my opinion, part of the issue with the way that the reform is happening is that schools really need to differentiate not only between cyber and brick and mortar, but also what the mission of the charter schools are. So when we have, just like pretty much everything, when you have a blanket approach, you fail to see the detail, and by definition, charter schools are intended to be something different than the traditional school and support the traditional school, not as an adversary, but as an adjunct, and to work in collaboration. So I think there's lots of concern with some of the way the terminology and the language is that's out there right now.
In terms of how it might apply to cybers and how it might apply to
Correct.
brick and mortar charter school. So, Nick, from your perspective, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, you believe that there are some areas that are in need of reform, or that the law needs to be updated. Can you explain that from your perspective?
Sure.
What you think needs to happen?
Sure. And by the way, I'm speaking for our school system. I'm not speaking for a larger scope. We absolutely think there needs to be reform in the law. The law is it's been around for several years, and it certainly needs to be overhauled. And we're not against that kind of a concept. In fact, as far as the high quality, let's go back to a couple of the pieces. The high quality education. High quality education is it's spoken about in a manner that is broad stroke brushed, but high quality education means different things at different times to different people. And so how you deliver instruction and how you assess students will vary from school to school, yet the single metric used for academics remains to be, in our opinion, a flawed mechanism, which is PSSA and Keystones. Right now there's a major push on school to work and employment and building up our trades. We believe that there should be more metrics used when you evaluate a system and what that system is responsible for. The system really should be focused on why they were chartered in the first place, and measurement should be done based on the intent of the charter. So we are, absolutely. Other areas that are in need of reform, one of the major areas is accountability, and you keep hearing about charters lack accountability, and we want transparency. I don't disagree with that, quite frankly. I think that any entity that takes public tax dollars should be responsible, whether that's public brick and mortar, public cyber, or public traditional schools. So as far as accountability goes, I don't think there's issue with that. I think for us, the issue is to imply that there's currently no accountability. That is in error. The amount of regulatory bodies that come in and do audits with us, from special education to federal programming to school improvement plans to comprehensive plans to the health department, the Auditor General's office, our annual reports that we have to do annually. There's our fiscal audit reports. There's accountability there. We're a right-to-know body. So, and we're responsible to the taxpayers, who are our parents and our students. So to say that there's currently no accountability, I believe, is speaking in error, and that's my take on it.
In terms of the accountability, Nick, can you explain how your board members are picked?
Sure. So our board, one of the primary differences between a charter school board and a traditional school board is the ability of a charter school to appoint our board members. So our philosophy has been to try and find a school board that has the right kind of background to support our mission and vision. As an example, we have former superintendents on our school board. We have attorneys on our school board. We have parent on our school board. We have folks from the business in our community. We have folks that are involved in the justice system on our board. And we have former curriculum directors on our board. So it really becomes a holistic approach to finding a support team that has not only the background and the education to understand our mission and vision of what we're up to, but then hold us accountable to make sure that we're in line and meeting that mission.
Do you think there's a need for, in terms of the boards, I mean, they're not really directly accountable to the public because they're not elected. Whereas the regular school board members, I mean, if the public's upset with how the schools are doing, they can be voted out of office, and there's some kind of pressure there for them to get the schools to perform. But in your situation, I mean, who are they accountable to then? I mean, if the charter, of course, the regular school board, because they can revoke the charter or
Sure.
not renew the charter. But do you think there's a way that there can be more of accountability to the public in terms of that structure?
You know, Ed, I think that one of the ways that our board is accountable is that they're still open public meetings, and the general community has the opportunity to address the board, to meet with the board. So our board is very accessible to the community. And quite honestly, the board also has to sign off on our reports, and so they are accountable through the regulatory bodies. I don't disagree with you. The piece that is different is the elected part of that, but they are held accountable through those other mechanisms.
And how long are their terms?
They are, for the chair and the vice chair, they are 2 to 3 year terms, and then the board can stay on for as long as they would like to stay on, and or the board finds reason that one should not maintain their role on our system.
There's been a lot of discussion too, Nick, about funding in terms of a lot of it has to do with cyber, because the contention on that end is that they're being paid at the same rate as the brick and mortars, and they don't have the type of overhead that you might have in terms of maintaining buildings, staffing, the maintenance of the buildings, and other issues. But in terms of funding, where do you think that needs to be improved, if anywhere?
Well, so not being in the cyber system, certainly having some viewpoints on it from the distance. I'm speaking more for the brick and mortar schools. I think that brick and mortar schools should be seen as any other brick and mortar public schoolhouse. There's the same overheads there. Relative to funding, I think that one of the issues that seems to be missed in the conversation relative to the financial issue is the bigger systemic issue relative to fair funding. Even in our district, Ed, we could have, being a charter school, we do get kids from all of the districts in Erie County. And at any one point in time, we could have a classroom of students that represent all of the districts, and each student has a different dollar amount attached to them. And when you take a look at that from a larger scope, Erie City is the lowest paid of all of them. So when we talk about funding, it's a bigger issue, and quite honestly, it appears at times as though it's just getting diverted to charters because the bigger issue is just that, so much larger of a systemic issue that's hard to meet. So I do believe that reform needs made. I also believe that if we're using the 363 forms, which is the mechanism to direct where funds come from and what the allocations are, and we take out from those funds transportation, athletics, the areas that truly charters do not account for, that's, I believe, a very valid stance. Above and beyond that, our students should be getting the same dollar amount as any other child in the state of Pennsylvania, but that's the bigger system, so at the very least the same dollar amount that their homeschool students get.
And your point seems to me, Nick, that in terms of the fair funding statewide, if the Erie School District were to receive more funding from the state, then your students, more money would follow your students from the Erie School District because of that funding increase.
Yes, in fact, without getting into too many details, the highest in the 1819, the highest pupil rate for special education, as an example, for 1819 was $26,000, but the students in Erie get $18,500.
What was the high? What that 26,000? What school district was that from?
If you don't mind, I'd rather not call out school districts. Just if that's okay with you, it's online, it's available. But certainly, in the same thing with general education, the highest school district is around 13,000, 12,900, and Erie was about 9,500. So again, these are issues that if you were to take the difference of those dollars times the number of students in their school system, things would balance out a little bit more. And I'm also not suggesting that other schools give up their dollar amount to equal it out. That's not the answer. That just creates more issue. This is a much larger problem that I believe we, the charter community, are taking a lot of hit for a failed and a system that really needs to step up and get a little bit more equitable.
Where do you think the debate needs to go from here? I mean, there's a lot of conversation about this. Not much has happened recently in Harrisburg on any number of things because of the political situation there. But, I mean, maybe a special session on charter schools or something. What would you like to see happen?
I would like to see a fair, honest conversation. In the ideal world, charter schools should be allies with the traditional schools. We should be able to coexist and really support the need that charters were intended to be, which is fill a gap of service to a specific need and or population to better the community as a whole. And we're so adversarial because of these dollar conversations that really is driving the bus. And I told you in the beginning, our opinion is there's no throwaway kids. Well, so decisions really need to be focused on that. What's in the best interest of kids? That's why charters were created in the first place, and it seems like that's no longer a major part of the conversation. So I would like to see that somehow get back on the table, Ed. I think that is a fair concept to revisit. And as far as the current reform, another piece to this that really doesn't make sense from my perspective is the fee for service for districts that are delinquent or simply not paying charter schools. That, to me, the logic behind it seems flawed from the beginning. In theory, basically what's being said is money by law is supposed to funnel from PDE to the traditional school. The traditional homeschool then is supposed to funnel that money to the charter school to where the kids are getting educated. If the traditional school does not forward the money, charter schools have no other option but to then request redirection from the state, whose money it came from in the first place. But the new reform would suggest that the charter school would have to pay for the state to step in to support monies that by law should have already happened. So for me, the logic is absolutely flawed. And like I said, I'm from our small world, we don't really have that issue. So I want to be clear and acknowledge our local school districts that I don't see that as the major issue. But from a state perspective, what that says is that the governor is not really supporting charter schools and allowing something to manifest itself because they're not, the current laws are not being followed. To me, that's flawed logic. And the bigger issue with that is what's next then. If flawed logic is driving this bus, what's right around the corner? For me, that's a concern as somebody who represents almost 600 families and students.
Nick, in terms of your charter, what makes you unique?
Sure.
In terms of what's written into your charter?
So, again, our charter was intended to support those students who are at risk for academic failure. And let me be clear, academic failure, at risk for academic failure is multiple pieces. It could be students that are being bullied. It could be students that come academically delayed and or behind. It could be students that are parents that need to work and move themselves in the community to gain money. So there's lots of reasons that kids would be at risk for academic failure. Our system, we have a couple ideas on that and ways to move students forward and through that. The first thing that would make us different is that we believe that what's called the proximal zone of development. When students come into a classroom and are sitting in a classroom and they're already academically behind, and they start on chapter 1 of a book, and the agenda by the end of the year is to get to chapter 20. So we're moving students forward at a pace that they're not ready to move at. So by the time the year goes, you see the achievement gap start to become greater. Our philosophy is students need to be taught at the level of functioning that they're currently at, but they need to raise their arm and stand on their tiptoes to reach that so that it's attainable, that they find success, and then they can build upon that success. So that would be one concept that we believe in. We also believe that time doesn't really, shouldn't drive the bus on how kids move forward in their years. We have many students that historically come to us with, significant truancy. And rather than failing kids year after year, we believe that you should give them an extra quarter to finish their work. Not fail them and have them start back at the beginning of the line, but have them start where they left off so that they can move themselves forward. So their pacing is a bit slower, which as a school, then we would take a hit on our graduation cohort. But from a realistic perspective, these kids are moving themselves forward. They're just able to do it at a pace that's more amenable to their situation. So I do believe that those are a couple pieces that make us different. I would say one final piece is the way that we design our instruction and our programming. Well, we provide workforce for kids. We know that we have a high amount of kids that are in poverty, so our goal is to support their fiscal needs, which also then motivates their academic needs. So there's a few examples of what would drive our system forward.
And in terms of this conversation, we appreciate you coming in.
Yes.
I think it's hopefully enlightened our viewers as to what charter schools are about and what's that issue with Governor Wolf's reform. So thank you again for being here.
Again, Ed, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thanks to everyone who joined in and participated in this week's GoErie Live discussion. This video will be available for replay on the GoErie Facebook page and on the GoErie homepage. Thanks again to Gannon University for sponsoring this discussion, and thanks to Nick for joining us today. You can find upcoming topics and guests on the GoErie Live on the GoErie Facebook page each week. Thanks for listening.